In this video we make a careful comparison between the Parramatta ECSI data on the one hand and the national ECSI trends on the other hand. We look for the period of 2023 to 2025. We look into 30,000 respondents from Parramatta, and for the national ECSI trends we have aggregated data from Queensland and Victoria of the same period, around 70,000 respondents. We look for similarities and differences to show the unique position of Parramatta in the Australian church landscape. We look first to teachers and school leadership, then to students, and then we go to a comparison between these two groups, making some general conclusions. We do each time the three scales. We start with PCB, we go to Melbourne, and we finish with the Victoria scale. So this is a comparison between Parramatta and the national trends for the PCB scale in teachers and school leadership. And we see that immediately external critique is rejected. That's not a point of discussion. Post-critical belief is very strongly developed, especially in Parramatta, also in the national trends, but stronger in Parramatta, in combination with an openness for diversity or relativism. We see that in Parramatta, post-critical belief is still much stronger than relativism, while there has been a kind of change, or almost change happening in the national trends, where relativism becomes as strong as post-critical belief. So we are at a tipping point there. And at the background, you see that literal belief continues to be strongly present, and especially in Parramatta, that's a big challenge because there is a 4.11, so an almost positive affirmation. So people seem not to be able always to distinguish literal from post-critical belief, which is a challenge, especially in Parramatta. If you go to the Melbourne scale, we see a high confessionality in Parramatta, which is lower in the national trends. We see that secularization is rejected very strongly in Parramatta, less in the national trends, and there's even a decrease of resistance against secularization happening nationally. That's not the case in Parramatta. You see that recontextualization is the way to go, even more in the national trends than is the case in Parramatta, and that's a consequence of the fact that because of a higher confessionality in Parramatta, people still believe that they can reconfessionalize through values education. While in the national trends we see with a lower confessionality that people are aware that values education is not so strongly helping to reconfessionalize. It even tends towards secularization, and that there's more need for recontextualization on the long term. So it seems that Parramatta is in the slippery slope higher than Victoria and Queensland, and for that reason we see that in the national trends the need for recontextualization becomes more in the mind of the people than is the case in Parramatta, which has a, let's say, more luxury starting position with that higher confessionality, at least today. If we look then into the Victoria scale, also good news, the dialogue school is the preferred position nationally, and also to a little bit lesser degree also in Parramatta. You see that the monologue school is stronger rejected nationally than in Parramatta, which means that in Parramatta the dialogue is still quite charismatic in nature, which is less the case nationally. You also see that the resistance against the colourless school is diminishing in Parramatta, which could be a consequence or reaction against that charismatic understanding of dialogue. And at the background we see both nationally and in Parramatta that the colourful school is popping up. The gap between the factual and the normative is big, and that's more the case nationally than in Parramatta. And you see therefore also that the response nationally to the dialogue school is even stronger than is the case in Parramatta. So again we see the same trends here as we saw in the Melbourne scale. So that's for the teachers. So the teachers are still, and the leadership are still, due to high confessionality, in a charismatic understanding of dialogue, which thinks that through values education you still can, to some degree, reconfessionalize the school, even if you see colorless answers to that tendency among the adults. Let's look now to the students, primary and secondary brought together in one schema for very recent, very huge data. If you look to PCB, we see in Parramatta that post-critical belief is still stronger than relativism, even if they enter here also into competition, while nationally we see that relativism has taken over from post-critical belief, even if post-critical belief is still supported by a majority of the students in Catholic education. You see that external critique becomes stronger than with the adults, but that it becomes much more strong nationally, almost positive, than is the case in Parramatta, where still external critique is under control. And concerning literal belief, you see that again the same trends. It's still positive with all students, showing that they cannot distinguish very well literal from post-critical belief, but that challenge is bigger in Parramatta than is the case in the other dioceses. That's for PCB. Same trends if you look into the Melbourne scale. That's quite challenging. You see that students see in the first place values education, and also nationally and in Parramatta, also they like values education on the long term. At the same time, we see that confessionality goes down nationally, but also in Parramatta, and that the consequence of that combination of a going down of confessionality and the support for values education ends into less interest in reconfessionalization, also in Parramatta, even less interest in recontextualization, and a fact that secularization becomes almost positive in Parramatta and is already positive as a national trend. So we see here how values education in fact has a secularizing effect in a going down of confessionality. And that's clearly the case in the national trends, and Parramatta is following, but to a lesser degree, because we see that still on the normative level there is support for recontextualization and even for reconfessionalization, but the gap is growing. If you look then to the third series of graphs, the Victoria scale, there we see the dialogue school is seen. That's very positive, both nationally and even more in Parramatta, so that's very well done. It is under pressure nationally, and to a lesser degree also the dialogue school is under pressure in Parramatta. You see that the monologue school is seen, especially in Parramatta, with almost 45% of the students getting green, and it's rejected on the normative level, and that trend is nationally much stronger than in Parramatta. But in both cases we see that the colourful school is growing in support. Nationally you can see that the colourful school has become even stronger than the dialogue school, which is not the case in Parramatta. So again you see that Parramatta it has a stronger confessional background, where the dialogue school is supported by the students on the normative level more than the colourful school. At the same time we see also these trends going up, becoming almost positive for the colourless school among students. So you see that the students are really already in another world than the adults if you compare these data. And that's what we do in this last graph. So here we compare the PCB. You see the dropping down of literal belief, but also the dropping down of post-critical belief. So literal belief is not transformed in post-critical belief, it's transformed in a growing external critique and relativism. We see that tendency nationwide, at the same tendencies in Parramatta, but to less strong degree. So we have, could say, more time or a better starting point to deal with these tendencies than nationwide. If you look to the second scale, you see in the Melbourne scale, you see that values education is very strongly supported by all categories. For the adults, it goes hand in hand with recontextualization, reconfessionalization, and a resistance against secularization. You see that if you look to the students, values education is very strong. In Parramatta, interesting, it goes together with recontextualization, so there is an openness towards this, which is much less the case in the national data, but we see in both cases also that in the students reconfessionalization is under pressure nationwide, but also in Australia in year 11, 12, students reject reconfessionalization and they would almost prefer secularization, which becomes even nationwide positive in years 11, 12. And then finally, if you look into the dialogue school, then you see that the dialogue school is supported very strongly with all people, also the students in Parramatta. To a lesser degree, that's also the case nationwide, but they're combined with the colourful school, while in Parramatta, the colourful school is a secondary tendency and the dialogue school remains very strong, even if it's combined with a monologue school, and you see that the older the students get, the more they reject the charismatic dialogue school or the monologue school, nationwide, but also in Parramatta. And we see in both cases that the colourful school is coming up, also in the Parramatta case. Remarkable is that the colourless school is not so strongly rejected among the students as an alternative for this whole Catholic school dialogue. That's the case nationwide, but also in Parramatta. This brings everything together in the subpopulations. If you look to the green, that's the support for recontextualization. You see that's very strongly developed in the adults, especially nationwide, and to a little bit lesser degree in Parramatta, because you still have that confessional luxury, if you want, for the moment. If you look among the students, recontextualization is reducing if the students get older, especially nationwide, but in Parramatta there's still an openness for recontextualization. Values education remains very strong. Nationwide and also in Parramatta, recontextualization is under growing pressure, especially nationwide, but also in Parramatta, and we see also the yellow, the secularization is growing nationwide to almost 1 in 2 students at the end of secondary education, 1 in 4 in Parramatta. So in Parramatta at the end you have a better result, if you want, than nationwide, where you can see that the 4 categories are present. Strong values education, 22% recontextualization, but 1 in 4, 25% into secularization. So you see the global trend is the same in Parramatta as nationwide, but Parramatta is still in a better position than nationwide, and is much more already on the secularizing trajectory than is the case in Parramatta. So you still have a lot of potentialities to deal with this situation adequately.